Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Kaga. Today I'm going to go through a video I'd hoped to get up a few days ago, but well, we'll leave that aside. This is all about the OE experimental heavy tank. That is the Tier 5 Japanese heavy tank, as you can see here on the screen. One of the things you're going to notice about this vehicle is that it looks like a very big box, and that's one of the challenges of using it. A little bit more on that in a bit. As you can see, it's a very large tank. It looks like you made it a light tank, a Japanese medium tank, and a dog, threw it onto a very large box and called it a tank. Now, this is a very big tank weighing just over 100 tons, and as you can see, that is without anything like super heavy spall liner or any other equipment. This is just tank loadout of kit, and that's it. So that's a very large tank, and it's quite surprising that this can go about 40 kilometers per hour. But in practice, you know that tanks rarely get up to their top speeds, so let's now shift focus to some of the armor. If you're the OE experimental driver, this is probably the angle you want to present to the enemy. It's just about right, allows you to minimize the overall amount of that large bar I'm highlighting on screen with the cursor of the mouse there, which is perhaps the single greatest weakness that you can present to any of your Tier 5 counterparts. And even some Tier 6 opponents may have some issues penetrating the vehicle at this angle. Those front bulges that you see in the front turrets, that 37 millimeter off on the right side of the tank, and the machine gun port here, and if you're side scraping correctly, that little bit on the left side of that tank is about all the enemy is going to have to shoot out of that upper top plate. You're going to notice that the side scraping there on that side bit, even though that part I was highlighting was entirely flat armor, just like the front here, and is 70 millimeters just flat armor. And it's worthy of note that this back area here is also 70 millimeters, so it's actually interesting to note that it's at a much steeper angle than the front plate, so the effective thickness engaging at any distance will probably be thicker than engaging at the front, so I would not recommend anybody try shooting that upper top plate of the OE experimental when you can get a good shot into the lower engine deck if you possibly could. So this vehicle has interesting choice of guns. There's the top 10 centimeter Cannon Type 14 that you see equipped right there. There's the stock 12 centimeter derp gun, and then there's a selection of 7.5 centimeter guns that I believe are shared with the, well, at the very least, the Type 5 is shared with the medium tank line. So, at the very least, you have the option of equipping a faster firing gun than the 12 centimeter that penetrates just a little bit better and is a little bit more reliable in time, but that's a personal choice. I think that the tank prefers to use the 10 centimeter gun, even though the rate of fire on the 12 centimeter gun is superior. But it's like the ubiquitous U11 122 millimeter derp gun that you find on like the KV1, the KV1S, the KV13. It's all about the high explosive damage and just coming up and derping people in the face. To get any reliable penetration, you need to use the high explosive anti-tank, which can get fairly expensive to run. And this vehicle just doesn't have the maneuverability to not use that high explosive anti-tank, and I mean that because you're just not going to be able to get around enemies to hit them in the sides or the weak spots, barring, those types of players. But it's probably not best to approach this vehicle with encountering those types of players in mind, or at the very least encountering them at the same tier as you. This vehicle can and regularly gets into tier 7 matches, no surprise, tier 5 heavy. The That is just something to be expected. And any of you that are familiar with like the T150 with that 107 millimeter gun, this vehicle's gun, the 10 centimeter, behaves very similarly to that. I don't have any of the equipment fitted into this vehicle, but if I were to keeping this for much longer, I would have to go with the super heavy spall liner, the large caliber tank gun rammer, and improved ventilation class 3. And I make that final choice because while the enhanced gun laying drive would help with the long aiming time of these guns, it's only going to help with that, whereas the vents will help with both the loading, the spotting, the driving, which all in all, this vehicle can use all the help it can get. And that's not to say that this is bad vehicle, it's just that in terms of actual combat, you're probably going to want to have every ace in your sleeve as possible, especially when you start dealing with tier 7 heavy tanks, which don't respect your armor in the least. So it's interesting that being a 10 centimeter gun that this vehicle's ammo selections include 105 millimeter AP shells, 105 millimeter I guess hardened case AP shells with the Type 95 Toku Cole, and 105 millimeter Type 14 high explosive shells. Wait, was this a 10 centimeter gun? What's it doing with 10.5 centimeter? Oh well. Uh, I'm going with basic consumables as this vehicle just doesn't really need anything in the way of premium consumables. You probably could get away with using Onigiri to maximize the performance of it, but I just no. So we're going to talk a little bit about recommended research path here. I was going to start with the guns. As you can see, the 12 centimeter short barreled gun is the stock gun. And if you ground out the Japanese medium tanks, you'll also have the Type 5 7.5 centimeter gun, which is a good second to choose when grinding out the real gun that you're going to want to use on this tank, the 10 centimeter Type 14. At the very least, when you're trying to grind out the engine that is going to take you all the way up to, I believe, tier 9, as well as the actual grind to the tier 6 OE heavy tank. You're going to notice that if you have also ground out the Japanese medium line to this point, you have also the top radio that is possible to equip to the OE experimental. Of note is that the OE experimental does not have a turret upgrade, so this means that the view range that you got, the HP that comes with it, is all you're ever going to get out of it. Now, while you can say that this lessens up some of the XP grind through the OE experimental, it does mean that everybody knows exactly what you have every single time. So, caveat emptor. And that's probably one of the more interesting things about this vehicle is that it's one of the few standard turreted tanks in the game that doesn't have a turret upgrade. So, interesting note about the engines is that the stock engine is an 1100 horsepower and the upgraded one is a 1200 horsepower. So you sit back and go, that's a lot of horsepower. But remember, it's moving a 100-ton vehicle, so even upgrading the from the stock engine to the upgraded one means that you're only gaining about 1 horsepower per ton. So I think that the recommended upgrade path would be to hit the 10 centimeter Type 14 and then get the tracks so you can fit all the equipment you want and then hit that engine before heading up to the OE tier 6 tank. And I make that recommendation because every single time you have the opportunity to grind out a piece of equipment at a lower tier that is going to be used at an upper tier, it's just plain easier to do. So it's interesting to look at the crew layout of these new Japanese heavy tanks, the OE, the series. You have a commander, a gunner, a driver, surprise, 2 radio operators, and a loader. Do we really need 2 radio operators? Can you give me control of that 37mm anti-tank gun? Please? Please? And now you might be sitting there going, well, that's just one extra crew member to have, but as you can see, the positioning of the two radio operators probably in those little front-mounted turrets, the positioning of the driver, the commander, and the gunner, the loader, these placements lead to certain practical outcomes in terms of the battle. The crew members you're most likely to lose are the commander and anybody else in the turret, which are the gunner and the loader. Because if you look at the placement of the driver and the two radio operators, that is difficult for much of anybody to penetrate, especially if you're angling your armor, you're side scraping, etc., etc., etc. And if you look at all of that spaced armor on either side of the vehicle, then in the form of the tracks, and you look at what's easier to penetrate, that giant belt of armor we talked about earlier, that's basically sits above the chassis and connects the chassis to the turret and that big rectangular blob. It's much easier to penetrate that, so that's what everyone's going to do. So if you had to choose to take a premium consumable, it probably would be that large med pack. You're going to lose your turret members a lot, and here, just zoom in on that spaced armor I was talking about. I mean, that's 75mm plate armor on the side right there. There's the tracks they're going to have to penetrate, the guide wheels, and then there's another, what appears to be 40mm of armor right there lining the hull. And this means, in practical terms, that most people are going to have a very difficult time penetrating the side armor of the OE experimental, especially if you are good at controlling both the angle of engagement and the distance of the engagement. So let's get into our first game, and that's more than enough theory crafting for one day. So this is a tier 6 match on Sand River. Alternatively, you may know this as Desert. This is an encounter battle, so I'm going to do the nice heavy tank thing and head for that nice point of engagement around C6 on our side and try to put the nice good gun depression of the OE experimental, that's thanks to that very high mounted turret, and put that to work and try to at the same time side scrape and, well, in a sense side scrape these set of dunes here to prevent the enemy from pushing around here and gaining an advantage. So this is fairly normal heavy tank tactics, and approaching the OE experimental, it's not really a surprise that you could get away with this, and almost got a clutch shot off on the looks. We're going to be seeing more of him in a bit. Pay attention for that, it's going to be funny. Foreshadowing. So now we're going to dive down a little bit here into this ditch behind, well, not really a ditch, that low point on the reverse side of the dune from the enemy. We're now going to turn in and, oh, there's a KV-220. Oh, nuts. We didn't penetrate that. I'm not wasting any time on trying to find any other weak spots in there. Let's just load up the Tokukol ammunition, aim for the turret, penetration. Let's see if we can keep up that level of attrition, huh? That's a very good exchange from my perspective. And we're gonna poke again. He puts another good penetration in there. Looks like he's penetrating the turret with that 57mm high velocity gun that's on the KV-220. So now we're loaded. We're gonna look to finish off that KV-220. We find it. Boom. Alright, there's probably the most lethal of the enemy tanks, aside from the box tank and the enemy OE tier 6 heavy tank. So now we've loaded back to our standard ammunition. Just look for the BDR, and we get a nice aim shot into his commander's cupola there, and we being very careful to minimize the silhouette because the BDR has a nice penetration 90mm gun. So let's go ahead, finish him off. There's that looks. Oh really? Oh really? Oh, wait. 300 full health damage ram. I love it. I was on cloud nine for that rest of this match because of that. Oh my, that made this match. So now, after that great spot of comedy, we're going to come down this little incline there, and as you can see, we are pushing past the listed speed limit a little bit here, but then we lose speed in the turns. And there's no surprise, this thing's a big vehicle. And remember that like abysmal .41 accuracy? Boom! So, Mr. Valentine, I think my shell wanted to be your Valentine there. No, it looks like our allies who pushed over the hill help contain these mediums, which really could have given us a bit of a run for our money. So now the enemy is trying to cap. We're going to put the speed of this tank to use. It's not very good on speed-wise in terms of sand, but there are very few heavy tanks that can say that they are. So it's not really a bad point of the vehicle. Right now we're stopping to see if we can get a shot in on some people, because every point that we can reduce the cap by gives us more time to get across this sand river. So we're now maneuvering here. We're going to be looking for shots on that OE, put one on the run. It never was going to hit unless RNGesus intervened. And I think right here I wasn't paying attention to the armor penetration indicator. I should have switched to the premium ammunition sooner. It did not penetrate the side of the turret of the OE, so I speculate that for most guns, the Japanese heavy tanks can have reliable ability to deal with them at all angles, even when it's flat on, at least within their tiers, and not really concerning too much about premium ammunition or hyper penetration on some types of premium ammunition to see later on. And no spoilers here. If that ELC wants it, that final kill, there's nothing I can do to stop him by grabbing that kill. He's going to get it, and that's exactly what happens. That's the end of the match. I'll be honest, when I was actually approaching the end of the battle, it kind of felt like I really hadn't done much, and maybe that's because of the relatively slow firing gun on the OE experimental. It gave me that false impression that somehow done worse than I actually did, but as you can see, we came out even without premium. That would have been a fairly good experience match, and it's no real wonder. This is a tier 5 heavy tank that was giving and taking from the best of the tier 6s, picked up a few kills, and we were able to do a decent amount of damage, and that surprised me. Really? Second place for damage? Really? You kill-stealing Sherman 3. Now, he probably wasn't really kill-stealing or even meaning to, but they're just amazing DPS machines like the OE Experimental and the T-3485 on the team, which both have very fast and hard-hitting guns for their tiers. And, you know, the Sherman 3 has that ridiculously low DPS 75 or 76 millimeter gun that comes on that Sherman, or that flavor of Sherman. And as you can see that because we fired those 3 premium shells to finish off the KV-220, we were able to make a profit in either case, but it does eat into your profits quite a bit to fire the premium shells for any lengthy engagement, and this is going to be something that you're going to have to weigh going into equipping the vehicle, because it has a large ammo capacity, so why not carry enough to at the very least put a dent into some tier 7 heavy tanks. But you're going to really want to use it sparingly. It does take a bit to fund if you fire more than just a handful. So the last match was all about putting the gun to work. Didn't really pay too much attention to anything like armor angling. It was all about the comedy now, wasn't it? And now you're probably sitting in, let's get to the business end of this. What does this look like in a tier 5 match? Well, I have just the match for you. It happens on Ensk. And just as a note, there are plenty of areas in Ensk that you see, like right here, with those hard buildings that the OE experimental will struggle to go through. So that's something you're going to have to plan around, and it's something that you could possibly use against one of these vehicles in a tight urban environment like Ensk. And it's another story. So we're going to start off the match just kind of moving up here to the typical heavy tank area. However, since I'm not the fastest of the heavy tanks on the map, I am going to take a pause right here, try to get myself an angle and prevent that T-34 from doing much of anything beyond sitting at that corner if I can. He comes by, puts a shot because I was pondering taking a shot at the T1 Heavy. Finish off the T1 Heavy. Now we're going to push our advantage. I know, one tank advantage is somehow enough to push, but given that there's just no evidence of an enemy push materializing or an enemy defense here, and is why not? So we take a shot from the enemy OE experimental, but it looks like our spaced armor in the tracks. Eat that one. Same from the Martyr 38T over there. Finish off that AMX 38 because he was what was shooting at us. The Martyr 38T isn't even bothering to try to shoot us apparently. Now, I saw that the Su-85 was preparing to aim over here, but he chose not to shoot us and went for our Chi-Nu. Interesting choice. We have an AFK M5A1. Well, why not take the shot? It's a free kill. I don't think there's anybody in the world of tanks that isn't going to say yes to a free kill. So right now I see that Sherman is neatly tucked away into this little area of buildings, so I'm going to move in here and support the Allied OE experimental who put in a nice shot into him just a little bit ago. Finish him off before he can reload, and we'll move on. So now we're going to play race for the remaining kills on this map. If this were a KV1, we would be struggling or completely out of the runnings for this. But because this is the OE experimental, we can pull up in here and finish off that T-14, who was also AFK. Makes me feel a little dirty saying that, but oh well. Kill's a kill. Don't need to be picky. So, for those of you who are paying attention in chat, there's that Sexton 2 who was saying very nasty things about us OE experimentals. When we're now most of the way through the match, and between the two of us, there's enough for Radley Walters. Let's go get us some artillery. We need some revenge. Our pride demands it. So we're going to move up to the traditional artillery haven here, but that's probably not the right play because that is a Sexton 2. Oh, and there he is. And right here, I rushed the shot. It would have hit if it wasn't for that destructible cover. I have to spend the time reloading, and in that time frame, someone picks up the kill. And I hope that this was a very enlightening replay about the average combat performance of the OE experimental in a tier 5 match. Surprise, surprise, we come out of that with a top gun and a high caliber. High caliber, really? It looked like a lot of kill stealing to me. Makes me wonder what's going on, huh? Pique your curiosity, doesn't it? Well, I imagine that's actually due to the very high alpha damage of the 10 centimeter gun that's equipped to the vehicle. It has what feels like kill stealing to it is really just shaving off 2/3 of it of even a tier 5 medium, one-shotting pretty much anything that's not a tier 4 heavy. You know, the good stuff. Things that, might make this tank seem overpowered. But before you all run off to the World of Tanks forums near you and start complaining that this tank is overpowered, remember, this thing has to face tier 7s with armor and guns that are somewhat effective against tier 9s. Doesn't seem so overpowered now, does it? So No surprise, top of the team lists in kills, experience, and damage, because that really was a sweeping of the field with this vehicle at Tier 5, and you kind of got a feeling for both the gun, the typical performance, and how the armor holds up at Tier 5. And as you can see, there may be a little bit of new tank syndrome, but there's also a lot of people just making bad shots, like into that giant bar on the bottom of the tank that's basically giant spaced armor around the tracks. That's not to say they can't penetrate it, but they're going to need better guns than what you're going to get on tier 3, 4, and 5 vehicles, and even using the premium ammunition is not going to be enough. And it's actually quite interesting just because of how short this battle really was. Well, not even 4 minutes long, and in terms of profit, we would have made just around 20,000 without the premium, but with the premium, it's just a lick under 30,000. This tank's actually fairly good in this respect. It's not like a premium tank by any stretch of the imagination, but play a few matches in this a day, you could start accruing a fair amount of credits fairly quickly. And if you join that in with a few other vehicles at tier 5 that make good money, or some like premium tanks, you could easily grind out just about any amount of credits you want fairly quickly. So that was a decently long video, first in a while, almost 27 minutes at this point. I hope that this was both entertaining and insightful about the OE experimental heavy tank, and I hope that this information will be helpful to you out there on the battlefield, whether you're trying to drive this vehicle or trying to defeat it. If this video was to your liking, or other content on this channel is of interest to you, please consider subscribing. I'm always looking to upload more videos, so there will always be something to look forward to. Did you see something in the video you didn't quite understand, or perhaps a situation I didn't cover, something about the vehicle that's still a mystery to you? Please let me know in the comments. I'd love to help you out in answering those questions. So once again, thank you and good day.